The court gathered to laugh at the old Omega and her useless stray wolves. By dawn, those same wolves would be the only army left between the kingdom and slaughter. Elara stood quietly at the edge of the training grounds, her silver-streaked dark hair tied back, simply her worn cloak dusted with snow. At 42, she was considered long past her prime, in a kingdom that prized strength, fertility, and sharp fangs. For decades, the pack had mocked her. The stray mother, they called her. The woman who never took a mate, never bore pups, and instead spent her life tending to the broken, abandoned wolves no one else wanted. Today, the mockery reached its peak. Alpha King Ronan stood on the raised platform, tall and commanding, his golden eyes scanning the assembled warriors. The kingdom was preparing for war against the Shadow Pact. Lord Harlan, the king's uncle and commander of the royal army, laughed loudly. He kicked a broken training collar across the snow until it landed at Elara's feet. "There," he said with a sneer, "a crown for your mutts, if you can even call those things wolves." The court erupted in laughter. Elara stood still, her hand resting gently on the head of a large, scarred black wolf named Grim. She did not flinch. Yet when Grim lifted his scarred head and looked toward the king, Ronan's wolf stirred uneasily beneath his skin. For one brief second, the Alpha King's golden eyes darkened with unease he quickly buried. "Enough," Ronan said, his voice cutting through the laughter. "Elara, take your strays and leave the grounds. We have no use for weakness here." Elara bowed her head slightly, a small act of quiet dignity, and turned to lead her wolves away. The laughter followed her like shadows. Beneath her palm on Grim's back, the scarred black fur warmed. A faint silver battle mark flickered under the old scars for a single heartbeat, then vanished before the court could see it. By the time night fell, Elara had reached the frozen borderlands with nothing but a torn cloak, bleeding feet, and the court's laughter still ringing in her ears. The snow fell heavier with each passing hour. She kept walking until she found her small shelter near the edge of the forest. There, her pack of strays waited. Grim, the scarred black leader, Ash, the limping grey female, and a few others she had rescued over the years. They gathered around the small fire she built, their bodies pressing close to offer warmth. Around the fire, the stray wolves began to lift their heads one by one. Beneath scarred fur and old wounds, faint silver battle marks flickered awake. Grim's eyes opened last, no longer dull but bright as moon-forged steel. Elara stroked his head gently. "They don't understand you," she whispered. "They never have." She did not know that these useless stray wolves carried something ancient and powerful within them. She did not know that the kingdom's true strength had been discarded long ago. And she did not know that the Alpha King would soon need them more than he had ever needed his proud army. Deep in the forest, Shadow Pact scouts moved silently toward the sleeping border village. One of them raised a black feathered arrow, its tip coated in shadow wolfsbane, poison made to silence royal wolves before they could howl. Far away on the balcony of the moonlit hall, Ronan's wolf suddenly slammed against his ribs and turned toward the forest. The Alpha King gripped the stone rail. Deep beyond the border, something ancient had awakened, and it had not awakened for him. The snow fell heavier as the night deepened. Elara moved through the forest with her pack of stray wolves following closely. Grim walked at her right side, his massive scarred body serving as both shield and guide. Ash limped on her left while the younger wolves stayed close. They moved as one, silent, purposeful, and strangely disciplined. Elara's feet bled from the long walk across frozen ground, but she did not slow down. She had long ago learned that stopping meant death. In the borderlands, the only thing that kept her alive was the wolves the kingdom had thrown away. She led them to a small clearing shielded by thick pine trees. There she built a fire with practiced hands. The wolves gathered around the flames, their bodies forming a wall of warmth against the wind. The stray mother sat among them, her back resting against Grim's side. She stroked the head of a young wolf whose leg she had once set. The wolf leaned into her touch. "They called you broken," she whispered, "but you stayed." Around the fire, the stray wolves began to stir. Their silver battle marks, hidden beneath scars and matted fur, started to glow with soft light. The marks brightened only when Elara moved among them. She felt it then, a quiet pull in her chest as if something ancient had begun to listen. Deep in the forest, the Shadow Pact scouts advanced. Their blades were coated in shadow wolfsbane, a poison designed to silence wolves before they could howl. Their goal was clear: strike the border villages before the moonlit hall could send reinforcements. One of the scouts paused and sniffed the air. "Wolves," he muttered, "not royal blood, but many." His companion smiled. "Strays. They will die quickly." Back at the clearing, Elara suddenly lifted her head. She did not know how she knew, but she could feel them coming. The wolves around her felt it too. She rose to her feet, snow crunching beneath her bleeding soles. For a moment, she looked at the pack she had spent decades protecting, the wolves the court had called useless. Then she spoke. "Protect the village," she whispered. Every silver battle mark flared at once. The wolves moved without hesitation. Grim took the front. Ash and the others spread out in a formation that looked nothing like the broken mutts the court mocked. They looked like soldiers remembering an old command. Far away in the moonlit hall, Alpha King Ronan stood on the balcony, unable to sleep. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin, growling toward the border forest. On the table behind him, Lord Harlan's report claimed the border was quiet and secure. Ronan's wolf snarled at the lie. He gripped the stone railing until his knuckles turned white golden eyes fixed on the dark tree line. Something was wrong, and for reasons he could not yet name, his thoughts kept returning to the old woman and her strays. Deep in the forest, the Shadow Pact scouts finally reached the edge of the clearing. They expected to find an old woman and a handful of broken wolves. Instead, they found a pack, standing in perfect formation, silver battle marks glowing under the moonlight with Elara at the center. The lead scout raised his bow. Elara stepped forward, her voice low but steady. "Protect the village." The lead scout released the black-feathered arrow. Grim lunged. The arrow struck the silver battle mark beneath his scars and shattered into moon-bright sparks. The wolf did not even slow down. For the first time in 50 years, the forgotten warwolves did not prepare to fight. They remembered how. The black-feathered arrow shattered into silver sparks. Grim stood tall in the moonlight, the broken shaft falling from his scarred chest. The silver battle mark beneath his fur blazed brighter than before, casting light across the snow. Around him, the other stray wolves held their formation low, growls rumbling in their throats. The lead scout of the Shadow Pact took a step back, eyes wide. Before he fled, he pressed 2 fingers to his throat and released a sound too low for human ears. Far beyond the pines, something large answered, with a low, twisted howl. Elara stepped forward, placing a hand on Grim's back. The wolf did not move, but his body leaned slightly into her touch. "They are the ones your masters forgot," she said quietly. The scout turned and disappeared into the trees, his companions following close behind. Elara watched them go, then looked down at her wolves. The silver marks on their bodies were still glowing. She could feel it now. A quiet pull in her chest, as if something ancient had begun to recognize her voice. She turned to face the pack. "Ash, take the younger wolves around the village's west side," she said. "Grim, stay with me. No one reaches those homes." The wolves moved without hesitation. Ash led a group of younger ones westward, while Grim remained at Elara's side. The rest spread out along the ridge, their silver marks pulsing in rhythm with their breathing. Elara looked down at the border village below. The people there were still asleep, unaware that death had nearly reached their doors. She had spent her life being told she was weak, useless, and unworthy of respect. Yet tonight these wolves, the ones the kingdom had discarded, had chosen to follow her. She did not know why the ancient power within them had begun to wake. She only knew that it had answered her command. Far away in the moonlit hall, Alpha King Ronan stood in his war room. A messenger had just delivered new information from the northern border. Your Majesty, the young wolf said, our scouts report movement near the old pine forest. There were signs of fighting. Shadow Pact forces may already be close to the border villages. Ronan's golden eyes narrowed. Lord Harlan's report claimed the border was secure. The messenger hesitated. Lord Harlan's scouts said the same, Your Majesty. Ronan looked back at the sealed report bearing Harlan's mark. For the first time, the document looked less like a mistake and more like a trap. He turned toward the balcony, his wolf stirring violently beneath his skin. Prepare a small force, he ordered. I will go to the border myself. Back in the forest, Elara and her wolves reached the ridge overlooking the village. From here they could see the faint lights of the settlement below. The wind carried the scent of pine and snow, and something darker, Shadow Pact. Elara placed a hand on Grim's head. The wolf's silver battle mark glowed steadily beneath her palm. Then the first village bell rang below. Once. Then it went silent. Every candle in the border village vanished into darkness. Grim stepped in front of Elara, his silver battle mark blazing. The Shadow Pact had not retreated. They had reached the village. The village bell had gone silent. Elara stood on the ridge, looking down at the border village, now swallowed in darkness. The sudden extinguishing of every light was no accident. The Shadow Pact had reached the settlement and was moving to silence it completely. Grim stood in front of her, his massive body tense, the silver battle mark beneath his scarred fur glowing steadily. The other warwolves waited for her command, their eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. Elara took a slow breath. Her old bones ached from the cold and the long night, but she did not allow herself to hesitate. These wolves had followed her for years. Tonight, they needed her to lead. Grim, she said quietly. We go in from the north. Ash, take your group and circle from the west. No one touches the villagers. The wolves moved without a sound. Elara followed Grim down the slope, her feet sinking into the snow. As they drew closer to the village, she could hear faint sounds. The muffled cries of people being dragged from their homes, the low growls of Shadow Pact wolves, and the occasional sharp sound of steel meeting flesh. Her heart tightened. These were the same border people who had sometimes left food for her and her stray wolves when the court turned its back. She would not let them die tonight. As they reached the edge of the village, Grim suddenly stopped. His ears twitched. From the shadows between two houses, 3 Shadow Pact warriors emerged, their blades dark with poison. They saw Elara and her wolves. One of them laughed, an old woman and her mutts. This will be easy. Grim did not wait for another word. He lunged forward with terrifying speed. The silver mark on his chest flared as he slammed into the first warrior, knocking him off his feet. The other 2 raised their blades, but Ash and 2 younger warwolves struck from the side, moving with coordination that no one would expect from stray mutts. Elara stayed back but kept her eyes on the fight. Every time one of her wolves was in danger, she felt that strange pull in her chest again. Without thinking, she raised her hand toward a warrior about to strike Grim from behind. Down, she whispered. The warrior's blade suddenly jerked downward, as if pulled by an invisible force. Grim turned and finished the fight in one swift motion. Elara stared at her own hand for a moment, surprised by what she had just done. The wolves were not the only ones changing. Across the village, more Shadow Pact forces were gathering. They had expected an easy raid on a defenseless border settlement. Instead, they were now facing an enemy they did not understand. Scarred wolves fighting with ancient discipline, led by an old woman whose quiet voice seemed to carry weight. Deep in the forest, Alpha King Ronan rode with a small force of royal guards. The cold wind cut through his cloak, but his golden eyes remained fixed on the path ahead. His wolf was restless, pulling him forward with increasing urgency. The messenger's words echoed in his mind. There were signs of fighting near the old pine forest. Ronan's jaw tightened. Lord Harlan had insisted the border was secure, yet the reports were becoming harder to ignore. He spurred his horse faster. Back in the village, Elara moved between houses with Grim at her side. They found a group of villagers, huddled in fear. inside a small barn. When the people saw the old Omega and her scarred wolves, some of them looked surprised. One woman, an elder herself, recognized Elara. You're the one who lives in the forest with the stray wolves, she said. Elara nodded. Stay here. We will keep them away from this place. The woman looked at Grim and the other werewolves, then back at Elara. There was no mockery in her eyes, only quiet gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Elara did not answer. She turned and stepped back out into the snow with her wolves. The Shadow Pact forces were regrouping. Their numbers were greater than expected, and more were arriving from the forest. The lead scout from earlier was among them, his face twisted with anger. He pointed toward Elara. Kill the woman first, he shouted. Without her, those mutts are nothing. Dozens of dark wolves surged forward. Elara stood her ground. Around her, the war-wolves formed a protective circle. Their silver battle marks burned brighter than ever. She placed one hand on Grim's back and spoke again, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. Hold the line. The war-wolves answered with a unified growl that shook the snow from the rooftops. And then, the two forces collided. Far away, Alpha King Ronan and his small force crested a hill. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of battle, silver light flashing against dark shapes in the snow. His wolf slammed against his ribs. Ronan narrowed his eyes. Something ancient was fighting down there. And for the first time, he wondered if the old Omega he had dismissed might be at the center of it. The clash between the war-wolves and the Shadow Pact forces turned the snow red. Elara stood at the center of the village square, Grim at her side like a living shield. The silver battle marks on the stray wolves burned bright under the moonlight, as they fought with a coordination that defied their scarred, broken appearance. They were no longer the mutts the court had laughed at. They were remembering what they once were. Grim lunged forward and tore through two Shadow Pact warriors in a single motion. Ash and the younger wolves struck from the flanks, moving like ghosts between the houses. The enemy had come expecting easy slaughter. Instead, they faced wolves that fought with the discipline of an ancient army. But the Shadow Pact numbers were growing. More dark wolves poured from the forest, their eyes glowing with unnatural hunger. Their blades were coated in shadow wolfsbane, and every cut burned like fire. Elara felt the pull in her chest growing stronger. She raised her hand toward a warrior about to strike one of the younger wolves. Down, she commanded. The warrior's legs buckled as if the ground itself had pulled him. He fell, and Grim finished him with a single snap. She was no longer just guiding the wolves. She was commanding them. Across the square, the lead Shadow Pact scout, the one who had fled earlier, raised a horn to his lips and blew a long, piercing note. The sound cut through the night like a blade. More enemies answered. Elara's breath came faster. She was tired. Her old body was not made for this kind of fight. But she refused to fall. Not while these people and these wolves still needed her. Then she heard it. The thunder of hooves. From the ridge above the village, Alpha King Ronan and his small force descended like a storm. His golden eyes burned as he took in the scene. The old Omega standing in the center of battle, surrounded by wolves that should not have been able to fight like this. Ronan's wolf slammed against his ribs with such force that he nearly lost control. He leaped from his horse in mid-gallop, shifting into his massive royal wolf form mid-air. Golden fire blazed along his fur as he crashed into the Shadow Pact lines, tearing through them with raw fury. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to pause. Ronan's wolf stood tall, golden eyes locking onto Elara across the chaos. Their gazes met through the snow and blood. In that instant, something ancient passed between them. Ronan shifted back to human form and fought his way toward her, cutting down any enemy that stood in his path. When he finally reached her side, breathing hard blood on his hands and face, he looked at her with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. "You," he said, voice rough. "You should not be here." Elara met his gaze without flinching the cub. "No, the war-wolves still fighting around them. "And yet I am," she replied, "because someone had to be." Ronan looked at Grim, then at the other wolves, whose silver battle marks glowed in the moonlight. His expression shifted from shock to something deeper, recognition and regret. "My wolf has been pulling me here since the night I sent you away," he admitted, voice low enough that only she could hear. "I thought it was madness, but now I see you were never weak. You were carrying something the kingdom had forgotten." A Shadow Pact warrior charged them from the side. Grim moved to intercept, but Ronan was faster. He struck the man down with a single powerful blow, then turned back to Elara. "I was wrong," he said. "About you. About them. About everything." Before Elara could answer, a black feathered arrow flew from the trees, aimed not at her but at Ronan's back. Grim roared and leaped. The arrow struck the silver battle mark on his chest instead of the king. It shattered into sparks, but the force threw Grim backward. The big wolf crashed into the snowblood welling from the wound. Elara cried out and rushed to his side. Ronan roared in fury and unleashed a wave of golden fire that incinerated the archer and several others nearby. He dropped to one knee beside Elara and Grim. The big scarred wolf looked up at them both, his silver eyes dimming but still proud. Elara pressed her hands to Grim's wound. Silver light flowed from her palms. The wound began to close, but slowly, too slowly. Ronan placed his hand over hers. Golden fire joined her silver light. Together, the two powers began to heal the wolf faster. Grim let out a low, grateful sound. But the Shadow Pact forces were regrouping. Their numbers were still greater, and more were arriving every moment. Ronan looked at Elara, his golden eyes burning with something new. Respect, protectiveness, and the beginning of a much deeper emotion. "We cannot hold them here much longer," he said. Elara looked down at Grim, then at the other war-wolves still fighting fiercely. She met Ronan's gaze. "Then we make them remember who they are facing." Around them, the silver battle marks of the stray wolves blazed even brighter. The forgotten war-wolves were no longer forgotten, and the Alpha King who had once dismissed them now stood beside the woman who had kept them alive. Part 6. Tuhon Che Anh. The battle's aftermath left the border village in stunned silence. Elara knelt in the blood-stained snow beside Grim, her hands still pressed to his chest. The silver light from her palms slowly closed the deep wound, but the effort drained her. At 42, her body was no longer young, yet the power flowing through her felt ancient and endless. Ronan stayed on one knee beside her, his large hand covering hers. Golden fire joined her silver light, strengthening the healing. The Alpha King's touch was careful, almost reverent, as if he were afraid she might vanish if he pressed too hard. Grim let out a low, grateful rumble. His storm-silver eyes opened and looked at both of them with quiet understanding. The other war-wolves gathered close, their own silver battle marks dimming as the immediate danger passed. They had fought like legends tonight, but they were still scarred, tired, and loyal only to the woman who had never abandoned them. Ronan looked at Elara. The woman he had once dismissed as weak now sat covered in blood and snow, healing a wolf most of his court would have ordered killed. Something inside his chest shifted, a crack in the armor he had worn for years. "I watched you tonight," he said quietly, voice rough from battle. "You did not run. You did not beg. You stood and commanded wolves that should not have been able to stand at all." Elara kept her eyes on Grim, but her voice was steady. "They were never useless. They were waiting. The kingdom forgot them. I did not." Ronan was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke words he had never said to anyone since becoming king. "I was the one who forgot." He looked at the war-wolves surrounding them, then back at Elara. "I cast you out because I believed strength was only power and bloodlines. I let Lord Harlan and the court convince me that mercy was weakness. But tonight, these wolves fought better than half my royal army, and they fought for you." He reached out slowly and brushed a strand of silver-streaked hair from her face. His fingers lingered for a moment, warm against her cold skin. I have much to answer for Elara. I threw away the one person who still remembered what loyalty truly means. Elara finally met his gaze. There were no tears in her eyes now, only quiet strength and the weight of decades of being unseen. You are the Alpha King, she said. You made a choice. I made mine. I chose to protect what no one else would. The Cubno Grim lifted his head and pressed it gently against both their hands. A soft, golden-silver light flowed between the three of them. For a brief moment, Elara felt the ancient bond of the warwolves reaching out as if the moon itself was acknowledging what was forming here. Ronan's voice dropped lower. My wolf has not been this calm in years, not since I sent you away. It recognizes you. It recognized you that day in the training grounds, and I forced it down. He took her hand fully, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I will not force it down again. Elara searched his face. She saw the king who had once discarded her, but she also saw the man beneath, exhausted, conflicted, and beginning to understand the cost of his pride. I am still the old Omega. The court laughs at, she said softly. I have no noble blood, no powerful lineage, only these wolves. Ronan shook his head. You have more than they will ever understand. You have loyalty that survived rejection, strength that survived mockery, and a heart that refused to harden even when the world gave you every reason to. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against hers. Let me stand with you now, he whispered. Let me protect what you have protected for so long. Elara closed her eyes. For decades she had walked alone with only her wolves. Tonight the Alpha King was asking to walk beside her. She nodded once. Then we protect them together. Around them the warwolves let out a low, unified sound, not a howl of war but one of acceptance. Far away in the moonlit hall, Lord Harlan stood in a hidden chamber, listening to a scout's report. His face darkened as he learned that the border village had been saved by the old Omega and her strays. The king has gone to the border himself, the scout said. Harlan's fingers tightened around a black dagger. Then we accelerate the plan. If the old woman and her wolves are truly awakening the forgotten lines, we cannot let them reach the capital. He looked at the map on the table, his eyes cold. Prepare the inner circle. We strike when the king returns with his new allies. Back at the village as dawn began to touch the sky, Ronan helped Elara to her feet. Grim rose with them, still weak but standing. The Alpha King looked at the woman he had once cast out, and the wolves that had just saved his border. For the first time he understood that the greatest threat to his throne was not the Shadow Pact outside the walls. It was the betrayal growing within them, and the only person who might help him stop it was the one he had thrown away. The journey back to the moonlit hall took 3 days. Elara rode beside Ronan on a horse he had given her, Grim walking protectively at her side. The other warwolves moved like silent shadows through the trees, never far away. The kingdom's roads, usually empty of such a sight, now carried whispers that spread faster than any official messenger. The old Omega had returned, and she was no longer alone. Ronan rode in silence for most of the way, his golden eyes often drifting to Elara. He had not spoken much since the night in the village, but his presence was different now, no longer cold and distant, but watchful and quietly protective. Every time they stopped to rest, he made sure she had the warmest place by the fire. Every time the warwolves grew restless, he let them approach her first. On the 3rd night, as they camped near an ancient standing stone, Ronan finally broke the silence. I have sent word ahead, he said, staring into the fire. The court will be waiting. Many will not be pleased. Elara stroked Grim's head. The big wolf lay beside her, his silver battle mark still faintly glowing. They were never pleased with me, she replied calmly. I have lived with their laughter for decades. I can live with it a little longer. Ronan looked at her across the flames. The firelight softened the hard lines of his face. You should not have to, he said. I should have seen you years ago. Instead, I listened to voices that told me strength only came in certain forms. I let them convince me that mercy was weakness. He paused, then continued more quietly. My wolf has not been this steady in years. It calms when you are near. It calms when the war-wolves are near. I spent so long trying to be the perfect king that I forgot what the first wolf truly stood for. Elara met his gaze. And what did the first wolf stand for? Ronan's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Loyalty. Not to power, but to those who earned it. Grim lifted his head and looked at the Alpha King. For a long moment the two wolves, one royal, one forgotten, stared at each other. Then Grim lowered his head again, resting it on Elara's lap in a clear sign of trust. Ronan watched the gesture with something close to awe. I do not deserve your forgiveness, he said, but I ask for the chance to earn it. Elara was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled between them. Finally she spoke. I do not forgive easily, Ronan, but I have spent decades learning that holding on to anger only hurts the one who carries it. I will give you the chance. Not because you are the Alpha King, but because I see the man trying to become something better. Ronan closed his eyes for a moment as if the words had weight he had not expected. Thank you, he said simply. The next morning they reached the moonlit hall. The entire court had gathered to witness their return. Whispers spread like wildfire as Elara rode beside the king, her pack of war-wolves walking proudly behind them. Lord Harlan stood at the front of the council, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes burned with cold calculation. Ronan dismounted first and offered Elara his hand. She took it, stepping down with quiet dignity. Grim stayed close to her side, his presence a silent warning to anyone who might speak against her. The Alpha King turned to face the court. I have returned from the border, he announced, his voice carrying across the hall. The Shadow Pact attacked our villages. They were stopped, not by our royal army, but by the wolves this kingdom has long mocked and discarded. He looked at Elara, and by the woman I once cast out. A ripple of shock went through the nobles. Ronan continued his tone, leaving no room for argument. Elara is no longer an outcast. She is under my protection. Her wolves are under my protection. Any who raise a hand against them will answer to me. Lord Harlan stepped forward, his voice smooth. Your Majesty, with respect. These are strays. They have no place in the royal hall. Grim let out a low growl that made several nobles step back. Elara placed a hand on the big wolf's head and looked directly at Harlan. They have more right to be here than those who would let villages burn to protect their own power, she said calmly. The court fell silent. Ronan's golden eyes hardened as he looked at his uncle. Enough, Harlan. The old ways are ending. Later that evening, in the quiet of the royal gardens, Ronan walked with Elara under the moonlight. Grim and a few of the war-wolves followed at a respectful distance. I know the court will fight this, Ronan said. Harlan especially. He has grown too comfortable with power. Elara nodded. He fears what he cannot control, she said. And right now he cannot control me, or them. Ronan stopped walking and turned to face her. The moonlight caught the silver in her hair and made her look almost ethereal. I meant what I said in the village, he told her. I want you by my side, not as a trophy, not as a symbol, as my equal, as the woman who reminded this kingdom what loyalty truly means. Elara searched his face for a long moment. Then stand with me when the court tries to tear us down, she said. Because they will try. Ronan reached out and gently took her hand. I will. In the shadows of the palace, Lord Harlan watched them from a high window, his expression dark. The old Omega and her wolves are becoming dangerous, he murmured to the figure beside him. We cannot let them reach the next full moon. The figure nodded. The plan is ready, my lord. Deep in the forest, one surviving Shadow Pact scout knelt before a dark altar, whispering to unseen masters. The keeper has awakened. The war-wolves remember. A cold voice answered from the shadows. Then we accelerate. The kingdom must fall, before the old power fully returns. Back in the garden, Elara felt a chill run down her spine. Grim lifted his head ears forward, silver eyes glowing. Something was coming. And this time, it would not stop at the border. The full moon rose blood-red over the moonlit hall, casting the kingdom in an ominous glow. Lord Harlan had not waited. At the stroke of midnight, the palace erupted into chaos. Traitorous guards loyal to Harlan opened the gates. Shadow Pact forces poured in from the forest, supported by corrupted royal soldiers who had been bought or blackmailed. The attack was swift and brutal. The royal army, weakened by years of false reports and hidden poison, struggled to respond. Elara woke to the sound of screams and steel. She rose from her bed in the guest wing, Grim already at her side, his silver battle mark blazing. The other werewolves were howling in the distance, answering the call. Ronan burst into her chamber armor, half-donned golden fire flickering along his arms. "Harlan has betrayed us," he said, voice tight with fury. He opened the gates. The Shadow Pact is inside the walls. Elara did not waste time on fear. She pulled on her cloak and looked at Grim. "Then we answer," she said. They moved through the palace corridors like a storm. Ronan fought at the front, his royal wolf form tearing through enemy lines. Elara stayed behind him, the werewolves forming a protective circle around her. Every time an enemy came too close, she raised her hand, and the silver power of the Keeper flowed through her. Not to kill, but to command. "Down," she whispered. Warriors dropped to their knees as invisible force pressed them into the stone. The stray wolves fought with terrifying precision. They were no longer the broken animals the court had mocked. They were the forgotten war wolves awakened by the woman who had never given up on them. They reached the great hall where Lord Harlan stood on the throne platform, surrounded by his elite traitors. The Shadow Pact leader stood beside him, a dark smile on his face. Harlan laughed when he saw Elara and Ronan. "You brought the old woman and her mutts," he sneered. "How fitting. The weak protecting the weak." Ronan stepped forward, golden fire blazing. "You have betrayed your own blood, Harlan. For what a throne you were never meant to sit upon." Harlan's eyes gleamed with madness. "For power that actually lasts. Your precious bloodline is dying, Ronan. The werewolves are relics, and this old Omega is nothing but a sentimental fool." He raised his hand. A wave of shadow wolfsbane arrows flew toward Elara. Grim lunged in front of her, taking several arrows to his side. The big wolf roared in pain but did not fall. The silver battle marks on the other werewolves flared violently. Elara felt white-hot rage and ancient power surge through her. She stepped forward, placing both hands on Grim's back. Silver light exploded outward in a brilliant wave. The shadow wolfsbane arrows dissolved mid-air. The traitorous guards around Harlan cried out as the light burned away the dark oaths binding them. Harlan staggered back, his face twisted in shock and fear. "What are you?" he hissed. Elara's voice carried through the hall, calm, but carrying the weight of decades of quiet endurance. "I am the keeper of lost wolves, the one who remembers what this kingdom forgot, that strength is not in blood or power. It is in loyalty that survives rejection." She raised her hand. Every werewolf in the hall howled at once. The sound shook the ancient stones. The silver battle marks on their bodies blazed like moonlight made flesh. The Shadow Pact forces faltered. Their dark wolves whimpered and backed away, sensing something older and stronger than their poison. Ronan shifted into his massive royal wolf form and stood shoulder to shoulder with Grim. Golden and silver light merged between the two wolves, royal and forgotten, creating a force the traitors could not withstand. Harlan tried to flee, but Elara's voice stopped him. "No." The word carried power. Harlan's legs locked in place as invisible silver chains wrapped around him. Ronan shifted back to human form and walked forward, his golden eyes burning. "You tried to destroy everything I care about," he said. "My kingdom, my wolves, the woman I should have protected years ago." He struck Harlan with a single powerful blow, knocking the traitor unconscious. The remaining Shadow Pact forces threw down their weapons, overwhelmed by the awakened warwolves and the combined power of the Alpha King and the Keeper. Silence fell over the moonlit hall. Ronan turned to Elara. Bloodied and exhausted, he dropped to one knee before her, in front of the entire court. "I was blind," he said, voice carrying through the hall. "I cast you out. I mocked what you protected. But tonight you saved us all. Elara, Keeper of Lost Wolves, I ask you, not as a king, but as a man who does not deserve you. Will you stand with me as my Luna, as my mate, as the heart of this kingdom?" Elara looked down at the Alpha King kneeling before her. The court watched in stunned silence. The warwolves stood proudly around her. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "I will," she said, "not because you are king, but because you finally chose to see." Ronan rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the regret, love, and devotion he had finally allowed himself to feel. Golden and silver light exploded through the hall, bathing every corner in hope. The forgotten warwolves howled in triumph. The old Omega had become the savior of the kingdom, but in the deepest shadows beneath the palace, one last black-silver token, hidden even from Harlan, pulsed once with malevolent red light. The true master of the Shadow Pact was still watching. The moonlit hall had never been so quiet. The bodies of the fallen had been cleared, but the scent of blood and shadow wolfsbane still lingered in the air. The surviving members of the court stood in stunned silence as Alpha King Ronan walked down the central aisle with Elara at his side. Grim walked on her right, his silver battle mark still faintly glowing. The other warwolves followed in perfect formation behind them. Lord Harlan had been dragged away in chains, his betrayal now laid bare before the entire kingdom. Many nobles who had once laughed at Elara now lowered their eyes in shame. Ronan stopped at the foot of the throne and turned to face the court. His golden eyes were no longer cold. They burned with quiet conviction. "Tonight this kingdom was nearly destroyed by the very man I trusted to protect it," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "Lord Harlan sought to erase the old bloodlines and seize the throne. He nearly succeeded." He reached out and took Elara's hand, raising it so everyone could see. "But one person stood against the darkness when my own army failed. The woman I once cast out as weak, the woman you all mocked as the stray mother. Elara did not run. She did not beg. She stood with the wolves this kingdom had forgotten, and those wolves remembered how to fight." A murmur rippled through the nobles. Ronan continued, his voice growing stronger. "I was wrong. I let pride and fear blind me. I believed strength came only from blood and power. Tonight I learned that true strength is loyalty that survives rejection, mercy that refuses to die, and courage that protects what others throw away." He turned to Elara, fully dropping to one knee before her, in front of the entire court. "Elara, Keeper of Lost Wolves, I publicly acknowledge the wrongs I have done to you. I acknowledge the strength I once called weakness, and I ask you before this court, and before the moon that watches over us all, will you stand with me as my Luna, as my mate, as the heart this kingdom has been missing for far too long?" The hall fell completely silent. Elara looked down at the Alpha King kneeling before her. The man who had once thrown her away was now offering her everything. She could feel the weight of decades of mockery, loneliness, and quiet endurance. But she could also feel the warmth of the wolves behind her, the family she had built from what others had discarded. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "I will stand with you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Not as a prize, not as a symbol of forgiveness, but as your equal, as the keeper who will remind this kingdom what loyalty truly means. I choose you, Ronan, the king who learned to see." Ronan rose and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her deeply in front of the entire court, a kiss filled with regret, gratitude, and the beginning of a love that had been forged in fire and snow. golden and silver light exploded through the hall as the bond between the Alpha King and the Keeper of Lost Wolves sealed itself. The war wolves howled in unison, their silver battle marks blazing like stars. When they parted, Ronan kept Elara close, his arm wrapped protectively around her. "From this day forward," he declared, "the stray wolves are no longer outcasts. They are the war wolves of the crown. And Elara is no longer the old Omega the court mocked. She is my Luna, my mate, and the protector of this kingdom's true strength." The court, once filled with laughter, at her expense now bowed their heads in respect, some with genuine reverence, others with reluctant acceptance. Later that night, on the royal balcony overlooking the kingdom, Ronan and Elara stood together under the moonlight. Grim and several warwolves rested nearby, their bodies finally at peace. Ronan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "I still have much to atone for," he murmured. "But I swear to you, I will spend every day proving I am worthy of the woman who protected what I failed to see." Elara leaned back into him, her hand resting over his where it lay across her stomach. "We will heal together," she said softly. "The kingdom, the wolves, and us." The cub, now strong and healthy, nuzzled against their legs, its silver eyes shining with quiet joy. In the distance, the sealed chambers where Lord Harlan was held remained quiet. But in the deepest shadows beneath the palace, one last black-silver token pulsed faintly with red light. The Shadow Pact's true master had not yet spoken. But the old Omega and her war wolves were ready. Spring arrived gently over the moonlit hall, melting the last traces of winter snow and painting the kingdom in soft greens and blooming moonflowers. Elara stood on the wide royal balcony, the silver crown of the keeper resting lightly on her silver-streaked hair. At her side, Grim sat tall and proud, his scars now badges of honor rather than marks of shame. The other warwolves moved freely through the palace grounds, no longer hidden in the forest, but welcomed as the ancient guardians they truly were. Ronan stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. His golden eyes were softer now, no longer burdened by the weight of pride and fear. "You look like you belong here," he murmured against her hair. Elara smiled, leaning into his warmth. "I belong with the wolves," she said, "and they belong with me. The rest, we are still learning." Ronan turned her gently in his arms so he could look at her. The Alpha King, who had once cast her out, now gazed at her with open devotion. "I have spent months trying to atone," he said. "I dissolved the old laws that called your wolves useless. I stripped the last of Harlan's supporters of their titles. But none of that matters as much as this. Standing here with you, knowing I almost lost the best thing this kingdom ever had." Elara reached up and touched his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "You did lose me once," she said softly. "But I chose to come back. Not for the crown. Not for revenge. I came back because these wolves needed a home, and because something in me still wanted to believe you could become the king they deserved." Ronan closed his eyes and rested his forehead against hers. "I will never take that belief for granted again." Below them in the palace gardens, the warwolves moved with quiet dignity. The court no longer laughed. Some even bowed their heads when the wolves passed. The kingdom was learning slowly, painfully, that strength came in many forms. That evening, the moonlit hall held its first true celebration in years. Elara walked down the aisle, not as the mocked old Omega, but as the keeper of lost wolves and the chosen Luna of the Alpha King. Ronan waited for her at the altar, his golden eyes never leaving her. When she reached him, he took both her hands in his. Before the entire court and the warwolves who stood proudly along the walls, Ronan spoke his vow. "I once cast you out because I was blind," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Today I stand before you all to say that Elara is the heart of this kingdom. She protected what we forgot. She awakened what we abandoned. She taught me that a true king does not discard the weak. He protects those who protect the soul of the realm." He looked into her eyes. "I choose you, Elara, as my mate, as my Luna, as the woman I love." From this day until my last breath." Elara's voice was warm and strong when she replied, "And I choose you, Ronan, the king who learned to see. The man who stood beside the wolves the world had thrown away. I choose you as my mate, my partner, and the one who walks with me into whatever future the moon has written." They sealed their bond with a kiss as golden and silver light filled the hall. The war-wolves howled in triumph, their voices rising like an ancient song. The court once filled with mockery now rose and bowed in respect. In the quiet months that followed, the kingdom began to heal. The war-wolves were given their rightful place as guardians of the realm. Elara's touch brought peace to old wounds. Ronan ruled with a balance of strength and mercy he had never known before. Together, they rebuilt what had been broken. One clear spring evening, Elara and Ronan stood once more on the royal balcony. Grim lay at their feet content and strong. The other war-wolves roamed the gardens below free and respected. Ronan rested his hand over Elara's slightly rounded belly. "Our child will never know what it means to be unwanted," he said softly. "They will grow up knowing the strength of loyalty and the power of mercy." Elara smiled and leaned against him. "And they will know that even those the world calls useless can become the light that saves a kingdom." The wind carried their words across the cliffs as golden and silver light danced together in the sky. The past had been answered. The forgotten wolves had returned, and in the heart of the moonlit hall a strong, steady flame burned bright, one that would never be allowed to die again.